Chapter 41. Strength in Numbers. Sonny was sprawled in the mud, looking at the sky. He didn't even have to catch his breath since the whole fight took less than 10 seconds from start to finish. No one was dead, wounded, or even bruised. Well, with the exception of the scavenger, it was completely out of his expectations. He glanced at the monster's corpse to make sure that it was actually dead, then summoned the runes and took a look at the number of shadow fragments in his possession. Shadow fragments, 1600. It was actually true. The mighty awakened beast perished just like that, and although Nephis did most of the work, he was the one to deal the killing blow. Why can't it always be so easy? Sonny got back on his feet and dismissed the azure blade. Then he remembered the words Master Jet had once told him. No one can survive in the dream realm alone. Back then he noted her advice but didn't really believe it. After all, he had always strived to be self-sufficient, not allowing himself to depend on anyone. In Sonny's mind, this was the true meaning of strength. However, now he was beginning to suspect that this logic was flawed. Indeed, having someone to share your burdens meant the difference between heaven and hell here in the dream realm. If he was alone, fighting against a single scavenger might have been the dream realm. If he was alone, fighting against a single scavenger might have been the end of him. Similarly, even though Nephis was far more skilled than Sonny, it would have been extremely hard for her to defeat the armored monster alone, being that its weakest point was out of her reach. But together, they had accomplished it with relative ease. The whole was greater than the sum of the parts. In other words, there was strength in numbers that surpassed individual power. In that sense, being able to depend on a group was not a sign of weakness, but on the contrary, an important facet of personal strength. Lone wolves would always be at a disadvantage. Apart from slight damage to her makeshift seaweed clothes, everything seemed to be all right. She glanced at Sonny. Memory? He shook his head. Nephis sighed. It seemed that she was a bit impatient to get herself a suit of armor of her own. If Sonny was a gentleman, he would have suggested to loan her the puppeteer's shroud for a while, but alas, he wasn't. That armor was extremely valuable and had cost him a lot. Plus, unlike Changing Star, the picture of Sonny wearing nothing but a seaweed loincloth would have been more disturbing than aesthetically pleasing. Soon, he approached the place where the blind girl was waiting patiently for their return. Hearing his footsteps, she flinched and raised her head. Sonny, how did she recognize me? Must be the way I walk. Yeah, it's me. Everything is over. Come on, it'll bring you to Nephis. Using the wooden staff, Cassie stood up and turned to him. Are you guys all right? Sonny smiled. Of course, we dispatched that critter in no time. Didn't even get a scratch. Cassie smiled with visible relief. Good, that's good. Oh, right, the rope. Sonny took the rope and guided the blind girl back to the clearing. On the way, he felt a bit weird. With the delicate girl walking behind him, he couldn't help but think of his little sister. As a toddler, she used to follow him around too, as though they were glued together. As the familiar pain stabbed him in the heart, Sonny gritted his teeth and tried to think about something else. It was all in the past anyway. Back in the clearing, Nephis was done breaking apart the scavenger's carapace. The shimmering soul shard was already in her hand. Without saying anything, she tossed it to Sonny. He caught the crystal and looked at her with surprise. Why are you giving it to me? He opened his mouth to ask the question, but she seemed to realize something and added, We'll divide the spoils later. All right. Nephis, meanwhile, turned to Cassie and said after some deliberation, I was careful. Then she smiled. Your shadow grows stronger. Your shadow grows stronger. Your shadow grows stronger. Sonny was feeling somewhere in between of being ecstatic and peeved. Throughout the day, they managed to kill 3 more scavengers, each time with not much risk to anyone except for Nephis. The process was largely the same. After discovering the monster, he would hide in the shadows. Was largely the same. He was wondering if that was what being in the main hero's party felt like. To anyone else, maybe with the exception of Castor, dancing around a deadly awakened beast would have been a tall task, most likely ending with the dancer's death. Then, it was just a question of physical prowess to evade and even manipulate them to a certain degree. Sonny had always known that skill and experience were more important than raw power. But by watching Nephis, he vividly understood just how vast the difference between them was. Even though his divine aspect allowed Sonny to exert more strength and speed than Changing Star, in an actual fight he would never stand a chance. Of course, he was also an important part of every encounter. His role as the finisher was not trivial, and not just anybody would have been able to accomplish 4 kills with 4 strikes. Even though Sonny was not taught any elaborate techniques, he was still a somewhat experienced fighter. He had good physical coordination, combat intuition, and most importantly, a cool-headed mentality. Not to mention the fact that they were only able to ambush the scavengers so effectively due to his shadow scouting them out in advance. All in all, it was an almost equal cooperation. Still, watching Nephis fight was nothing short of sobering. Trying not to get too dejected, Sonny summoned the runes. Shadow fragments, today, pretty excellent. At some point, Nephis gave the command to move. Helping Cassie along, Sonny followed Changing Star and quickly traversed the open space between the labyrinth and the statue. Now, they only had to get on top of it. However, it wasn't that easy. Scaling the 200-meter tall monument would have been hard in normal circumstances, but now they also had to somehow pull Cassie up. Leaving her behind until they were at the top would not have been safe. In the end, Nephis and Sonny took turns pulling the rope every 20 meters or so. Cassie would hold on to the rocks and wait until they climbed higher, and then the process would repeat. But they managed to get to safety before the dark waters washed them away. As the night began to descend, the three sleepers sat in the center of the circular stone platform and rested. As they did not bring any materials to make a fire, and it was already too late, there was no way to cook food. They ended up chewing on the strips of dried meat, passing the bottle of limitless water around. After some time, Nephis gave Sunny a sign to take out the spoils of today's journey. He took out the 4 shimmering soul shards and put them on the ground. By the time Nephis and Cassie had absorbed their soul shards, he still didn't make a move to take his. After a while, he took another crystal out of the rucksack and moved all 3 to Nephis. The silver-haired girl looked at him with surprise. "Don't you want to grow stronger?" Sunny grinned. "Of course I do, but these won't do me much good right now. It's no secret that you are the main fighting force of our group." He sighed. "The stronger you are, the better our chances of survival will get. Plus, it's not a gift. It's a trade." Nephis raised an eyebrow. A trade. What do you want?" Sunny deliberated for a few seconds before answering. "It's rather simple. I will give you these soul shards and all other soul shards I earn on the way to that castle. Then," he looked her in the eyes and said, "in return, you will teach me how to fight." Chapter 42. Essence of Combat. Nephis looked at him and contemplated. This time she remained silent longer than usual. Sunny felt a bit nervous under her gaze, knowing that he was being evaluated. With Changing Star's skill and insight, it wasn't hard to imagine just how much she had gleaned from his battle performance. Both his current level and future potential must have been pretty much laid bare in front of her. Were they enough to make teaching him worth her while? After some time, she took the soul shards and nodded. As far as performances went, this was a great one, so when do we start? Nephis shrugged. Now. Sunny glanced at the sun, which was already almost gone. Were they going to train in complete darkness? It wasn't really an obstacle for mastery of combat can be divided into 2 aspects. One is body, and the other one is mind. Training the body is not easy, but it is rather simple. All you need is repetition and experience. In a fight, things happen too fast to consider every detail in the moment. That's why your technique must exist in your muscles and bones, so much so that it almost becomes an instinct. She paused. You can achieve initial results through repetition. Then, it must be cemented through experience. The more battle experience you have, the deeper a technique will be assimilated into your body. There is no other way. That simultaneously made a lot of sense and no sense at all. On the one hand, the principle of improving through practice was quite logical. On the other hand, Changing Star's statement made it seem like all those lofty legacies with their years of training were nothing but harmless children. After all, no matter how good their tutors were, they had no real battle experience. But then again, she did wipe the floor with every one of them, excluding Castor, with no apparent difficulty. So maybe her statement was true. That, however, posed a question of its own. Just what kind of life had Nephis led to possess rich battle experience at the tender age of 18? Should I stop calling her princess? Meanwhile, Nephis continued. Training the mind, however, is not simple at all. That is because, once you reach a certain level of skill, the mind is where the true combat takes place. The outcome is often decided before your body begins to move. And to master the mind, the first step is to understand the essence of combat. And almost at the same time, Sunny said, "Survival." Changing Star shook her head. "No." Then she rubbed her neck and pierced them with a cold, fierce gaze. "The only thing that matters is to be the last one standing." In this way, anything you do in combat must be viewed as only serving one of 2 purposes, either to kill your enemy or to prevent the enemy from killing you. Nephis lowered her eyes. If you can understand that, you will have enough clarity to master the mind. After that, Sunny couldn't fall asleep for a long while. He lay on the cold stone, looking into the darkness and thinking about what Nephis had taught them. Repetition, experience, clarity. These were the 3 keys to becoming a fearsome warrior. All 3 were important, but the last one was the most vexing. Was it really how Changing Star had said? Was there nothing at the core of being a warrior than a cold will to kill? Intuitively, he felt that it was indeed so. This ruthless truth was, in a sense, an amalgamation of all his life experiences. After all, for someone like him, life was nothing but a constant battle for survival. Someone always won, and someone always lost. But now, it seemed like he had just exchanged one battle for another. This was an uncomfortable thought. Chapter 43. Repetition. The blind girl was stumbling at the edge of the platform with a horrified expression on her face. With her blonde hair in a mess, she was stretching her hands out, clearly lost in space. Of course, there were no walls for her to find. His sudden lunge could have caused her to lash out with the sword before asking questions. All of these were good reasons to wait and observe first, but in an uncharacteristic and completely irrational manner, Sunny acted before thinking. He caught Cassie moments before she took a step off the platform and, holding her tightly in his arms, dragged the blind girl back. "I got her!" Sunny yelled, letting Changing Star know that there was no need to stab him with the sword. And then, in a quiet voice, he said to Cassie, "I got you! It's all right! Everything is fine!" Calm down. He felt the girl's body trembling and looked around again, trying to understand what its girl's body trembling and looked around again, trying to understand what had scared her so much. But there was nothing. Nephis was listening to the sea for the same reason. After a few seconds, she asked, "Do you see anything?" Sonny helplessly shook his head. No. He helped Cassie sit down in the center of the platform. While Nephis stood guard above them, he looked the blind girl over to make sure that there were no wounds on her body. Everything seemed to be fine. She was not hurt anywhere. Changing Star looked down. Although her face remained indifferent, he could tell that she was a bit flustered. After a second or two, she asked in something that might have been her version of a calming tone. It sounded pretty much exactly the same as usual. "Cassie, what happened?" Magically, that did seem to calm the blind girl down a little. At least enough for her to speak in a quivering voice. Cassie extended one hand and pointed down. "The head, I saw. Oh gods." Sonny frowned and looked at Nephis. Did she see a vision? The past? The tall girl was silent for a moment. "I don't know. It never happened before." Both of them turned to Cassie, not sure what to do. Since there was no apparent danger around, they took turns trying to calm the horrified girl down. However, after that one sentence, she fell quiet and refused to speak again. Nothing seemed to help. After a while, Nephis sighed. "Let's leave her be for now. Maybe she needs time." Sonny was about to retort, but truth be told, he didn't have any ideas either. In the end, he just nodded. "Okay, he'll keep an eye on her." Changing Star, however, had other ideas. As the sun was rising and the surging sea was receding, Nephis chose to give Cassie some space and led Sonny to the edge of the platform. However, she made sure to always have the blind girl in the periphery of her vision. Kasia sat hugging her knees. Her eyes were closed, but small tremors that periodically ran through her body betrayed that she was awake. Sonny's eye twitched. "Are you sure it's okay to leave her like this?" Nephis gave him a complicated look. "Yes." Then, after some thought, she added, "Cassie is strong." Sonny wasn't sure how to answer. If Changing Star considered someone to be strong, then they most likely were. Wasn't she someone who constantly needed their help? But then again, there were different kinds of strength. Kasia was still alive and sane despite her debilitating flaw. How many people could have done the same, if you say so? Then Nephis made him summon the azure blade. After studying it for a while, she nodded and took her longsword out of the air. Despite its size, it was an elegant weapon. Your sword can be used with one hand, but its true potential can only be revealed when held in both. It is created primarily for cutting and severing, hence the higher center of gravity. However, it can thrust as well. Then she gestured to hers. The hand near the pommel simultaneously pulled the handle up, giving the blade a tremendous boost in speed. This is how you generate force and perform powerful strikes. Now, your turn. Sonny looked at his sword and gripped it with both hands, mimicking Nephis' pose. Then, he raised it and slashed down, making sure to enhance the force of the strike with his lower hand. Changing Star observed him. You need to understand that a strike doesn't come from the hands. It comes from your whole body. Power comes from your feet, your hips, your core, your shoulders, and is only then transmitted to your hands. This time, Sonny paid attention to the overall stance and movements of every part of Changing Star's body, as opposed to only the sword. He wasn't a novice to fighting. Instinctively, he already knew how to deliver a proper punch, even if, before, there wasn't a lot of strength in his body. The principles of striking with a sword were largely the same, so Sonny quickly understood the overall concept. He performed the simple downward slash a few more times. After each time, Nephis gave him pointers and corrected his mistakes. Sometime later, she was finally satisfied with his form. "Did she say 1,000? He blinked. Sorry, how many times?" Changing Star tilted her head and thought for some time. "Well, we don't have much time today, so yes, only 1,000. Ha ha ha, only 1,000, eh?" Sonny forced himself to sound polite. "I see, all right." As Nephis walked back to sit with Cassie, he turned to the sea and raised his sword. 1. The azure blade whistled as it cut the air. He raised it again. 2. Push and pull. This is how you generate force. 3. Strike with your whole body, not just your hands. 4. As Sonny raised his sword, repetition. By the time he was done performing 1,000 strikes, Cassie was finally ready to speak. Chapter 44. Cassie's Dream. With pretty much every muscle in his body sore, Sonny walked over to the girls and fell on the ground. After catching his breath, he looked at Kasia. "Cassie, do you feel better?" Several seconds later, the blind girl slowly nodded. "That's a relief." He shifted and hesitated for a bit. Kasia didn't look too well. Her face was still very pale with a distant, dazed expression on it. Her body at least was no longer trembling. Sonny wasn't very good at talking to people, let alone placating them. He wasn't sure what to say. He cast a gaze at Nephis and sighed inwardly. Who knew that one day he would turn out to be the most sociable person for as far as the eye could see? What a joke. "Can I have some water?" Cassie turned to him and scowled as though confused by the question. Then she suddenly gasped and opened her eyes wide. Oh, sorry. Yes, of course." She summoned a limitless water bottle and offered it to Sonny. He took it with a grateful smile and greedily drank a few gulps before giving the bottle to Nephis. Eventually, it returned to Cassie. "You drink some too." After she did, he awkwardly patted the blind girl on the shoulder. "Everything seems to be fine now." Did you dream of another vision? You can tell us, if you want." Cassie hesitated for a bit before saying, "I don't know." After all, people usually did not dream in the dream realm. The blind girl, meanwhile, continued, "I don't really remember. It's all in fragments. Sunny carefully considered his words, not wanting to pressure Cassie too much. You can just tell us what you remember. Maybe we'll be able to make sense of it together. Cassia sighed and tentatively nodded. After a long pause, she finally found the courage to speak. At first, I saw a boundless darkness locked behind 7 seals. Something vast was churning in the darkness. It was as though my mind shattered into 1,000 shards, each shard reflecting its own image. Most of them were dark and scary. Some I have already forgotten. The other, Cassie fell silent, remembering. I saw the human castle again, only this time it was at night. There was a lonely star burning in the black skies, and under its light the castle was suddenly consumed by fire, with rivers of blood flowing down its halls. I saw a corpse in a golden armor sitting on a throne, a woman with a bronze spear drowning in the tide of monsters, an archer trying to pierce the falling sky with his arrows. Finally she looked up, her face full of horror. In the end, I saw a colossal, terrifying crimson spire. At its base, 7 severed heads were guarding 7 locks, and at the top, a dying angel was being consumed by hungry shadows. When I saw the angel bleed, I suddenly felt as though something so precious that it can't be described with words was taken from me. Her voice became quieter. Then I felt so much sorrow, pain, and rage that what little remained of my sanity seemed to disappear. That was when I woke up, I think. Nephis and Sunny remained silent for a while, trying to make sense of what Cassie had told them. Even if Nephis had an idea, she didn't show it. It showed her a human fortress and even the direction in which it was situated. This time, however, her dream was disjointed, full of weird symbolism and vague, uncertain images, much more like a charlatan's prophecy than a vision gained through an aspect ability. Finally, he sighed. Maybe it actually was just a nightmare. Your previous visions weren't like this, right? Cassie silently shook her head. Sunny scratched the back of his head. Inwardly, however, he felt uneasy. A dying angel being consumed by shadows. Why does it sound so ominous? I should try and stay away from angels in the future. Guy, what has become of my life? A sentence like that doesn't even sound insane anymore. With that, they were finally ready to welcome a new day. Sometime later, they were sitting on the western edge of the stone platform, looking at the scavengers below. Sunny's shadow was busy scouting a path to the next high landmark. Were there always that many? Sunny glanced at Nephis and shook his head. No, there were much more. They seemed to be almost done with the carcass, which meant that, by tomorrow, all these beasts would be roaming the labyrinth, making it hard for the 3 sleepers to make any progress. It would be best to leave today and put some distance between themselves and the horde before the scavengers were done with their feast. However, without scouting a path in advance, there was a chance of not making it to safety in time. Both options were risky. Nephis frowned, seemingly thinking the same. After a while, she said, I don't want Cassie to spend another night near this statue. Let's leave now. Sunny thought for a while, then opened his mouth to offer his own opinion. However, a sudden commotion below prevented him from speaking. Down at the bottom of the disappearing sea, amidst mounds of broken coral, the carcass of the giant shark-like monster, the remaining half of it, to be precise, was almost stripped of meat, and between its white bones something was shimmering in the mud. 2 extremely large luminescent crystals. Sunny's eyes widened. Are those, yes, shards of 2 transcendent soul cores. Transcendent? 2 of them. Suddenly, he was simultaneously filled with greed and fear. Greed because of how rare and precious transcendent soul shards were. Fear because the giant shark turned to be a corrupted devil at least. One corrupted devil, if not stopped by a saint, or a large number of awakened, could potentially destroy an entire city. Sunny belatedly realized that he was much closer to death on that first night than he had previously thought. Should we wait and listen? He stared at Nephis and then obediently listened to the distant, barely audible clamor of the scavengers. After a while, he noticed some disharmony in it. Nephis suddenly tensed up. Their carapace seemed to be thicker. It was colored in deep black and scarlet, like an ancient armor drenched in blood. Here and there, vicious-looking spikes were growing out of the carapace, making their every move much more dangerous. Additionally, instead of heavy pincers, their upper arms ended with long, curved, terrifying bone scythes. Sunny felt cold sweat running down his spine. They were the next step in a nightmare beast's evolution, and these 2 seemed to be bigger, deadlier versions of Carapace Scavengers. Sunny and Nephis watched as the 2 monsters approached the carcass. The scavengers were visibly afraid of them, rushing to get out of the way. Those who were too slow were mercilessly thrown to the side or cut apart by the bone scythes. Rivers of azure blood were flowing into the mud. What are they doing? Did they come to absorb the soul shards? Finally, the monsters reached the carcass. Sunny blinked and looked at Nephis. Do we still leave now? Changing Star frowned and hesitated. A few moments later, she shook her head. No, we'll go tomorrow. Then she turned west and observed the retreating monsters. Get your shadow to follow these 2 back. Chapter 45. Sound of laughter. Because of the shadow fragments Sunny had absorbed in the last few days, the range of shadow control has increased a little. However, it was still far from being enough to explore deep into the labyrinth. He only got the general direction in which the 2 large monsters were moving. They were going west, at least. That's what it looked like. She might as well have been asleep, for all Sunny knew. After a while, Cassie turned to him. Sonny? He tilted his head to look at her. Yeah? The blind girl hesitated. Do you think we'll be able to return home? Sonny glanced at her and furrowed his brow. A few seconds later, he turned away and looked at the sky again. In fact, I'm willing to bet that you couldn't have found a better duo of sleepers to escort you across the dream realm. If anyone can survive this, it's us. So, yeah, I think that our chances of making it back are pretty high. Cassie suddenly giggled. Aren't you a little too full of yourself? You were in the second to last place? Sonny shrugged. That's only because someone smart told me to keep a low profile. Otherwise, I would have ranked higher. Then, with a grin, he added, much higher. Third to last, at least. It was nice to see that people were still able to preserve a bit of mirth even in this hellish place. Come to think of it, this was the first time he heard Cassie laugh at all. Back in the academy, she was always dull and bleak. After the sudden outburst, Cassie's expression slowly turned wistful. A few seconds later, she asked, what do you miss the most about home? Sonny smiled. I don't have a family. Well, I guess I have a sister somewhere. But we haven't seen each other in many years. Oh. The blind girl fell silent. Several seconds later, she said quietly, I miss my family the most. There was longing and sadness in her voice. Sonny didn't know what to say, so he stayed silent. Mom and Dad must be really worried about me right now. No, actually, they wouldn't be worried. They would be heartbroken. In the evening, Nephis made Sonny perform the 1,000 strikes again. After that, they ate the last strips of dried scavenger meat and took turns sleeping, so that one of them could always keep an eye on Cassie. If we get separated, proceed to the high point by yourselves. Don't wait for me. Do you understand? With a somber expression, he gave her a nod. Nephis returned it. Good. Time is of the essence, so let's go. With that, she began the descent. After Nephis reached a point 20 or so meters below them, she found purchase and waited. Using the golden rope, Sonny lowered Cassie down. Just like while climbing up, they took turns helping the blind girl. Luckily, climbing down the statue was much easier. Soon they reached the ground. Entering the labyrinth, the trio moved forward with haste. The shadow was ahead of them, scouting for monsters and optimal paths. Eureka Shadow was ahead of them, scouting for monsters and optimal paths. Despite that, their progress was slow and chaotic. They had to constantly change direction to avoid groups of scavengers, often ending up in dead ends or moving further away from their destination. Sonny, who played the role of the scout and navigator, felt his brain slowly starting to boil. At some point, however, they inevitably ended up in a situation where a fight was unavoidable. There was a large group of scavengers at their heels, and a pair of them blocking the path ahead. Neither of the two groups had noticed the sleepers yet. However, since there were no other passages to turn into, it was only a matter of time. But there's no time to set up an ambush. He wasn't quite sure how they could fight two scavengers at once. Despite how good of a teacher Nephis was, he only practiced with the sword for a day. Facing against a scavenger alone was risky. Changing Star shrugged. It's almost the same. But what else could they do? A bit rattled, Sonny gritted his teeth. All right. After a short pause, Nephis summoned her sword. Then she stepped forward. Chapter 46. After finding a good hiding spot for Cassie, Sonny and Nephis proceeded forward to face the scavengers. Soon they saw two hulking silhouettes in the distance. With her lips pursed together, Nephis threw over her shoulder. Keep up. She was practically flying through the air, like an arrow let loose from a bow. One of her arms was stretched backward, holding the sword with its point to the ground. The other was cutting the air with each stride. It took the two scavengers a couple of seconds to realize what was happening after noticing her. By that time, she was almost upon them. With madness burning in their eyes and viscous saliva dripping from their mandibles, the monsters screeched and charged forward. Nephis did not slow down, as though planning to ram them with her body. The inertia carried her forward as she slid through the mud, passing between the scavengers. Then she twisted her body and stopped herself by plunging the sword into the ground. A bit slower, and she would have been impaled by one of the scavengers' legs. It was just about to turn around when Sonny finally got close enough to launch an attack. Silently cursing, he ran up a narrow protrusion on the coral wall and jumped, aiming to pierce the weak point at the scavenger's back from above. His shadow was already wrapped around the azure blade, but at the last moment the scavenger suddenly moved, slightly turning its torso to the right. The blade missed the concave spot where the armor plates connected, and instead hit one of them square in the center, sliding helplessly across adamantine chitin. Crap. Instead of killing the beast with one decisive blow, Sonny ended up dealing no damage at all. What's worse, he landed right on top of the scavenger, practically hugging it from behind. In the next moment, the scavenger shook its carapace, throwing the irritating human off. Sonny flew sideways and crashed into the labyrinth wall, feeling breath being knocked out of him. Suffocating and disoriented, he fell gracelessly into the mud. Not good. By some instinct, Sonny rolled to the side. Something tore past him and hit the wall, sending pieces of crimson coral flying through the air. Then, he was lifted into the air and thrown backward. But by that time, however, he had already come to his senses. The scavenger was already charging at him, with a menacing fire burning in its eyes. Repetition. Experience. The shadow flowed from the azure blade to his hand, then spread to his arm, shoulder, and then finally covered his whole body. Sunny instantly felt stronger, faster, more resilient. But was it enough? No. To survive, he would definitely also need some luck. One pincer flew at him from the right, the other from the left. There was no time to retreat or dodge sideways. So instead, Sunny did something that made every instinct in his body scream in protest. He jumped forward, closing the distance to the charging monster. The pincers clashed together with a loud crack behind his back. Instinct or not, it was the only logical step. After all, the attack range of his sword was much shorter than that of the scavenger. He could only fight back by getting close. Before the beast had time to react, Sunny did what he had recently done thousands of times. His muscles moved even before his mind gave the command. With one fluid motion, he raised the sword over his head and slashed downward, pushing with one hand while pulling with the other. His whole body moved in concert to deliver a powerful blow. The azure blade whistled as it cut the air. Then it hit the joint of one of the scavenger's front legs and cleaved right through it, severing the limb entirely. Blue blood sprayed everywhere. Sunny had less than a second to be amazed. I actually did it, but there was no time to be distracted. Due to the loss of its front leg, the scavenger lost balance for a moment, careening forward and down. However, he had 7 other legs. This wasn't going to last long. Coincidentally, though, at this exact moment, his other front leg slid in the mud, bringing the monster even further down. Sunny did not waste this chance. Taking a step forward, he thrust the azure blade up, pushing it into the scavenger's mouth. A severed mandible fell to the ground as the monster impaled itself on the sword with its own weight. The massive body of the nightmare creature convulsed before falling still. It was dead. Sunny slowly exhaled, only now feeling the pain in his chest and at the back of his head. He carefully touched it and grimaced. His hand came back wet with blood. At least I'm alive. You have slain an awakened beast, Carapace Scavenger. Your shadow grows stronger. You have, with no time to listen to the spell, Sunny tugged on the sword to dislodge it from the monster's head and hurried to help Nephis. However, it was too late. The other scavenger was lying in the mud, clearly dead. His limbs were still twitching, indicating that the fatal blow was delivered just moments ago. In the deathly silence of the battle's aftermath, Changing Star's voice sounded strange and subdued. Sunny suddenly felt as though someone had squeezed his heart in a fist. Steeling himself, he took another step forward. His face was burning. Without thinking about it, he even made his shadow look away. An awkward silence followed. After some time, Sunny forced himself to speak. Are you all right? However, Sunny couldn't help but feel that the look she gave him was somewhat weird. Forget it. After checking the wound on his head, Changing Star said, It's just a bleeder, nothing serious. Tell me if you feel dizzy and nauseous or have a strong headache, though. Since Sunny had none of these symptoms, he kept quiet. Nephis looked down at his clothes and sighed. Silver Bell, Puppeteer Shroud, Azure Blade, Chapter 47. Echo. It's an echo. Sunny couldn't believe his eyes. Echoes were an extremely rare type of reward that Awakened could receive after slaying nightmare creatures. Chances of getting one were very low. In the real world, an echo could be sold for an unimaginable amount of money. That's because they were much more precious than memories. Without delaying it much further, he dove into his sea of soul. There, very few things had changed. A lonely black sun was still hanging above the calm, silent waters. It was orbited by spheres of light that represented his memories. This time, there were 3 of them. Just like before, Sunny couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was stealthy moving just beyond the periphery of his vision. However, this time, he didn't pay it any attention. He wanted to see his echo. It too was represented by a sphere of light. However, this sphere was much larger and hovered further away from the shadow core. With a thought, he commanded it to descend. The sphere slowly floated down and touched the dark water. As Sunny came closer, walking on the surface of the sea, its radiance slowly faded away, revealing the monster contained within. Hulking, menacing Carapace Scavenger was calmly standing in front of him. There was no madness in its eyes, or any feeling at all, for that matter. After all, it wasn't really alive. It was just an echo. Shining runes appeared in the air around the scavenger. Echo-typey beast. Awakened. Echo attributes. Strong, armored. Echo description. A cursed soldier of the Fallen Legion. Before Sunny knew it, a wide grin appeared on his face. That scavenger was now his. It could be summoned and used to fight against his enemies, carry heavy cargo, or perform other tasks. What's more, it was a whole rank above its master, which meant that it was much stronger, more resilient and fearsome than a dreamer with a dormant core should normally possess. The soul of sea suddenly surged a little, and a new set of runes appeared. Transform Echo into a shadow? Sunny flinched and snatched his hand back. What the hell is that about? He had never heard anything about transforming echoes into something else, let alone shadows. Then again, he had never heard about Shadmans. 2. It seems my aspect holds more secrets, too. It seems my aspect holds more secrets than I thought. Sunny licked his lips and hesitated. Then he cautiously said, Yes, however, nothing happened. They can either enhance my own core, or do something weird to echoes. How do I know which use is more beneficial without knowing what a transformation actually does? An echo was plenty useful by itself. Sunny felt that it would be wiser to concentrate on strengthening himself, at least for now. He'll experiment with it later. With that, he left the Sea of Soul. Since he had spaced out for quite a bit, Nephis was looking at him with a silent question in her eyes. Sunny grinned and got an echo. The hulking beast immediately appeared in front of him, seemingly sewn together from tiny sparks of light. Soon, its black chitin became fully corporeal. Following Sunny's command, it shifted a little and raised its mighty pincers. Nephis observed the echo with an unreadable expression. Then, a corner of her lips slightly curled up. Good, especially if they're not trying to kill you. Cassie hesitated. Well, okay, if you think it's for the best. Sunny and Nephis helped the blind girl to climb on top of the echo. Then they used the golden rope to create makeshift reins for Cassie to hold on to. However, with a monster of their own by their side, the mood and mental state of the three sleepers were much better. For the first time since coming to this place, Sunny felt somewhat calm. Of course, this calmness didn't last long. At some point, he noticed that the wind had picked up a bit. Almost simultaneously, Cassie asked them to stop. Nephis and Sunny looked at her with deep frowns. It seemed that they both had a bad premonition. Then, the blind girl cautiously kneeled and put her ear to the ground. What do you hear? Cassie licked her lips, its murmuring. Suddenly, a drop of water fell on Sunny's face. He raised his head and looked at the sky. There, dark stormy clouds were gathering with unnatural speed. Chapter 48. The Storm. We need to move now. As Nephis turned to him, Sunny grabbed Cassie and helped her stand up. His face was even paler than usual, and there was a panicked look in his eyes. Now, help me get her back on the scavenger. The silver-haired girl raised her head and looked at the sky. Soon her expression darkened. Without saying anything, she did as he had asked. Cassie seemed a bit disoriented. She grabbed the reins and helplessly turned to her friend. Neph? What is going on? Changing Star glanced at her. When she eventually spoke, her voice sounded heavy. A storm is coming. Meanwhile, Sunny sent his shadow to climb on top of a tall pillar of coral and looked ahead, trying to understand how far the cliffs they were aiming for. From the look of it, there was still a considerable distance to go. However, the giant statue was already much further away. Going back now would have been suicide. He turned to Nephis. We're about 3 or 4 kilometers away from the cliffs. Do you think we can make it? She scowled. Strong winds were howling between the coral blades, sending bits of mud and seaweed flying. There was no need to hold back and conserve strength for the long run. If they were late to reach the cliffs by a minute, their lives would be over. They had to give it their all. Sunny was ready to fight a series of bloody skirmishes all along the way, but to his surprise, the inhabitants of the labyrinth did not give them much trouble. The scavengers seemed to be as panicked as they were. The bulky beasts were busy trying to hide inside the coral mounds or burrowing underground. On the rare occasions when one of them showed aggression, a quick slash of the sword or a threatening clack of a pincer was enough to make the monster change its mind. However, no matter how fast they were moving, the storm was enough to make them much trouble. The rain quickly turned into a pelting downpour, each drop becoming a torrent. The winds grew in strength, striking against their bodies with enough force to make them stumble. The light dimmed even further, reducing visibility to almost zero. Finally, a blinding bolt of lightning tore through the darkness, followed almost immediately by a deafening thunderclap. In the next moment, the ground under Sunny's feet trembled, causing him to lose balance and fall. He rolled in the mud and tried to stand up, but slipped and fell again. By the time Sunny began to move, the dark, salty water was already as high as his shins. He gritted his teeth. The sea was coming back. He couldn't determine where the water was coming from, but with each minute it was rising higher. Soon it was up to his knee, then up to his waist, making running almost impossible. The speed of the group slowed down considerably. It was then, in a sudden flash of lightning, when they saw a dark mass of stone ahead. They had made it to the cliffs. Almost at the same time, a terrible rumbling sound came from the depths of the labyrinth. Turning back, Sunny saw a colossal crushing torrent of black water rushing through the crimson forest. Some distance away, a tardy scavenger was caught by it and thrown against the coral wall. The unbreakable carapace of the mighty creature cracked and burst open like a rotten egg. Curses! He turned to Nephis. Time is up! Start climbing! She caught him by the arm. Dismiss your echo! Sunny didn't know whether the scavenger could scale the cliff. In any case, Cassie wouldn't have been able to hold on if it did. He helped the blind girl get down and then sent the monster back to the Sea of Soul. Nephis lowered herself to let Cassie climb on her back, then tied them together with the golden rope. Without wasting any time, she gritted her teeth and stepped forward to grab onto the wet rocks of the cliff wall. They began the ascent, rushing to get as high as possible for the black torrent. In the next moment, a wall of dark water hit the rocks mere meters beneath their feet. As Sunny held for dear life, the whole cliff shuddered. A few boulders fell from somewhere high above, missing his head only by chance. Somehow, all 3 of them were still alive. One slip of a hand, and he would plunge down to be crushed against the cliffs, drown, or be eaten by some giant monster. The torrential rain and hurricane wind made everything even worse. And yet, there was no choice. He frantically kept climbing, tearing his skin on sharp rocks. Every muscle in his body was in agony. If not for the shadow wrapped tightly around his body, Sunny would have been long dead. But even with its help, the surging dark water was getting closer and closer. Damn it. Damn it all. No matter how hard Sunny tried, he couldn't win back any distance. Soon the water was at his feet. The sea slowly swallowed his legs, then his torso. He kept climbing, now fighting against the weight of the water and the force of the tide that was trying to tear him away from the cliff. But it was useless in the end. When the water covered his shoulders, he felt his fingers slipping from the wet rocks. Sunny tried to hold on, but the current was too strong. He was pushed away like a weightless toy, losing any purchase. No, in the last second, a golden rope fell into the water beside him. Shaken, Sonny grabbed onto it and held with all his strength. The rope drew tight and lifted him out of the water. His feet touched the cliff wall again. Not wasting any time, he resumed climbing with the help of the rope. Finally, a strong hand grabbed him from above and dragged his body over the edge of the cliff. Sonny fell to the ground, struggling to breathe. After some time, he looked at Nephis, who was lying in a similar position to his right, equally as drained. She was still clutching the golden rope in her hand. Cassie was sitting a few steps away from them. He wanted to laugh, but had no strength for it. They survived. Chapter 49. Natural Element. For a few minutes, Sonny simply lay on the ground, letting the rain hit his face. From time to time, a bolt of lightning arcs through the skies, drowning everything in blinding light. Other than that, it was almost completely dark. If not for his attribute, he would have had trouble discerning the shapes of Nephis and Cassie, who were resting nearby. After some time, however, a feeling of uneasiness entered his mind. Something was off. Sonny scowled, trying to understand where that feeling was coming from. Finally, he realized that it was his shadow. It was trying to draw his attention to something. Please, let me rest. I just want to rest. However, the shadow was very persistent. It remained adamant. In the end, Sonny moaned and rolled over on his stomach, then slowly stood up. Nephis turned her head and looked at him. What is it? He grimaced. That space was littered, seemingly at random, with piles of dirt and tall boulders. Nephis got up and summoned her sword. Do you see anything? Sonny frowned. Not really. At that moment, another lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the small island. His eyes widened. The tall boulders surrounding them were massive and irregularly shaped. They were black in color and motionless. That's why Sonny had not recognized them for what they were at first glance. All around them, scavengers were silently consumed by terror. It seemed the three humans were not the only ones who thought of taking shelter from the dark sea on these cliffs. He trembled. These cliffs were a death trap. Noticing something on his face, Nephis tensed. Sonny. He slowly turned his head to her and whispered, Don't speak, don't move, just stay where you are. Maybe they were asleep or patiently waiting out the storm, trying not to move in fear of attracting more terrifying monsters. Maybe they simply did not notice the humans. After all, it was unknown how well these creatures could see. Were they able to see in the dark? Probably not, or at least not as well as he could. There was still hope. Sonny opened his eyes and looked at the small island again. He just had to execute each step perfectly. Crawl through the darkness. Strike without alerting the enemy. Kill each of them with one precise blow. Rinse and repeat. He already knew their strengths and weaknesses. All that was left was to put that knowledge to practice. And even if he makes a mistake, there were other means to fall back onto. Echo and Nephis could do their part if he were to land himself in danger. He quickly determined the optimal order of attack to minimize the chance of being discovered and proceeded to the first target, a hulking scavenger that was the furthest away from the pack. Hidden in the shadows, Sonny suddenly felt calm and focused. He felt as though he was finally in his natural element. A moment later, it plunged into the weak point on the scavenger's back, piercing the chitin and destroying its brain. The quiet crack of the breaking carapace was quickly washed away by the rain. It was done. However, on closer inspection, Sonny noticed something that he had missed before, and when he did, his face paled. Chapter 50. Death Trap. The scavenger was dead. However, it wasn't Sonny's blade that killed it. While circling the target, he was focused on staying unnoticed and not alerting the enemy to his presence before reaching the optimal position for an attack. After that, he only saw the monster's back. That's why he didn't notice the terrible wound that ran from the top of the creature's torso to its segmented legs, obscured by the rain. The unbreakable carapace was cut open like a tin can. The scavenger's flesh and mangled organs could be easily seen through the large gap, oozing azure blood. He might have felt awkward about performing a perfect ambush on a long-dead monster if not for the fear of whatever had killed it in the first place. Looking around, he hesitated and summoned the azure blade back, then wrapped himself in the shadow. The small island was silent except for the howling of the wind. The rain was still falling down, forming a constant veil that hid away all details and distant objects. A rare flash of lightning sometimes flooded this bleak world with stark whiteness. Then a thunderclap would come, making the skies tremble. With cold fright settling deep into his bones, Sonny cautiously moved to the next scavenger. He could tell from some distance that it was also dead, but had to come closer and make sure. The creature was almost severed in half by the unknown assailant. Its wet innards were lying on the ground in a messy pile. The darkness had long ago stopped being comforting, becoming terrifying and oppressive instead. Sonny shivered. They could just hide and hope for the best. He wouldn't be alone, at least. However, not knowing what kind of danger was hiding in the darkness would drive him insane long before the morning came. Plus, with his fated attribute, hoping for the best was a fool's errand. That's why, although his body was covered in cold sweat, Sonny gritted his teeth and slowly walked toward the ridge that was obscuring the rest of the island from him. Coming close, he started climbing, trying to be as quiet as possible. The ridge wasn't very high, so he was able to scale it without much effort. Right beneath him, just a few meters away, a dark silhouette was outlined against the rocks. It was much larger than the scavengers, with jagged spikes growing out of its thick carapace. Its chitin was black and crimson, like an ancient armor splattered with fresh blood. Instead of pincers, two terrifying bone scythes were protruding from the joints of its arms. Each one was long and sharp enough to split a scavenger in two. Sonny froze, afraid to move. He even stopped breathing. So that's the killer. It was one of those monsters that they had seen retrieving the transcendent soul shards from the giant shark's carcass, or another of their kind. He remembered how the two creatures had cut through the horde of scavengers, killing or throwing aside any beast that got in their way. Slaughtering just 7 of them would not pose a problem for something that deadly. Not to mention getting rid of 3 sleepers, careful not to make a sound. Sonny slowly lowered himself down. His whole body was trembling. Moving his arms and legs with utmost precision, he began climbing down from the ridge, praying not to be heard, sensed, or noticed in some other way. Luckily, the monster remained oblivious to his presence. Reaching the ground, Sonny took a few steps back, still facing the ridge. He had to force himself to turn around. Feeling as though his back was being pierced by invisible needles, the young man stealthily moved in the direction where he had left his companions. A couple of minutes later, he returned to Nephis and Cassie. The girls were tense and nervous, waiting for his return in the darkness. Before coming out of the shadows, Sonny let them know that he was approaching. "It's me." Nephis moved, lowering her sword a little. Her face was a little grim. "What is the situation?" she said, careful to keep her voice low. Sonny slowly exhaled, finally feeling a bit safer. "The killer is one of those big monsters we saw. The thing with the crimson pattern on its carapace and sides instead of pincers. It's hiding from the storm beneath a stone ridge not far from here." A bolt of lightning flashed, illuminating everything around. In its aftermath, it looked as though 2 white sparks ignited in Changing Star's eyes. Soon the reflection was gone, leaving them gray and inscrutable again. She tilted her head and whispered, as though talking to herself, "An awakened monster." Sonny licked his lips. "Yeah, so what should we do?" Nephis thought for a while, leaning on her sword. Then she looked at him and said. Finally, he collected himself and said the first thing that came to his mind, "Are you nuts?" The idea of fighting that thing was pretty ridiculous, if not completely insane. If we have to fight it anyway, it's better to be the ones initiating the fight. Changing Star looked around and added, "It's not completely dark yet. Although barely, I can still see. Once the night comes, this won't be the case, so we will have to attack it first and do it soon." Dormant humans are not supposed to be able to deal with awakened beasts, let alone monsters. The fact that we can reliably kill scavengers is already abnormal. She looked back at him, undisturbed, and simply answered, "But we are abnormal." Sonny stood there with his mouth open, not knowing what to say. Nephis sighed. "You and I both are not exactly ordinary sleepers, aren't we? Don't try and deny it. Someone ordinary simply would not have survived in this place." She looked down at the silvery blade of her sword and added after a couple of seconds, "In any case, as I have already said, we don't have a choice." Sonny gritted his teeth, trying to find a logical retort. However, her reasoning seemed unassailable. He just had a really bad feeling about fighting that monster. In the ensued silence, Cassie, who had been quiet all this time, suddenly spoke. "You are forgetting about the main advantage we have over that thing." Both of them looked at her surprised. The blind girl turned to face them and slightly lifted her head. "We are intelligent, and the monster is not." Some time later, he was standing in the darkness, looking at the terrifying creature in front of him. His expression was grim and somber. Tightly gripping the azure blade, Sonny slowly inhaled. The ominous feeling he had before was still there, now stronger than ever.